Hi, thank you for watching this demonstration video on the angled raked range pattern, where we'll be looking at examples of the angled rake range pattern, both day and night, and some examples of do's and don'ts. I'll show you it from both the perspective of TAC view, so you can see the flow and the sequencing and how you and your fellow flight mate should work together. And I'll also show you it from the perspective of the headset with in-cockpit audio, so you can see exactly the sorts of things that go on inside. All of the footage I'm showing you today is from training sorties, so you may find that there's a little bit extra talking outside of the radio brevity. So in this first portion here, we can see that we're approaching our target centroid here, our echo point, which we can imagine is just in front of this highlighted truck here. And we're literally just going to fly overhead it. It doesn't need to be absolutely perfect, because remember, the key feature of the angled rake range pattern is the sequence, not necessarily the precision of positioning. Now in this example you can see that I, as the flight leader, have broken first, and I'm descending from 1200 feet down to 1100 feet, so from the join altitude down to the pattern altitude. I'm just going to center on this truck here. And in this instance again, I'm being the first person to turn, as this is an operational type scenario where the flight leader always goes first. The reason on a training scenario we would get the the student to go first is because we don't want the student to just base their target acquisition based upon what the leader has bombed. So it's allowing us to develop both those skills there. So you can see there I turned the beam, and then as soon as I was a beam I reported that I was a beam, and I did a sort of squared off turn here to allow myself to get the correct delta distance, and I'm at 11,000 feet. And once I was a beam, my buddy started his turn, my wingman. That means that as I'm rolling IP inbound, he should be in a good position to watch for missiles and cover me. So just speeding things up a little bit here, you can see here that as I report IP inbound, remember delta distance of 3 miles and a slant range of 5 miles, I make a nice tight turn such that it's not a nice curved turn as it is on the other end. You see my wingman here has done a nice perfect curved turn there. It's a really sharp turn. It doesn't necessarily line up with the final attack heading that we can see here, and it's all just about getting a good sight picture and being able to select the target using the T-pod or the DMT. And here we are at 2.5 miles. Okay, so we're at 2.5 miles, and you can see I'm what is called shallow low wire. So our velocity vector should be on the 45, and unfortunately it isn't. The pipper for the bomb line would be slightly below that, so this is shallow low wire. So in order to correct that the next time around, I would either fly in lower, which is not recommended because it makes you more susceptible to small arms fire, man pads and AAA, or you can roll in later to get the equivalent angle. Remember, terrain rises and falls, so you need to adjust your selection of the rolling point accordingly. So tracking, release, and then the pause, and then the pull. And then the jink during the off-target maneuver. I'm back into third person here, and speeding that up a little bit. We can see that we had a nice steady dive angle. There's velocity vector, there's the nose attitude angle, and a good unguided release, dispensing flares as we come off the target. And then a good jink to the right and to the left before turning out. So the key thing here is that I want to be turning out as my buddy's turning in, so that I can be on the downwind watching him. just going back to the start of this example here, you can see that as I start to turn IP inbound, my buddy is more or less a beam, which means that he should get a good solid view of the target area from the side to be able to see any launchers. Again, if there are any man-pad launchers or AAA fire, it's going to appear to be going side to side to him, so left to right, which will make it more obvious and easier for him to spot. So that's why you want to be roughly a beam rather than behind or ahead, where you've got more of an oblique angle onto the enemy fire. Okay, so we've just fast forward a little bit so that you can see how the attack pattern has progressed. You can see that it's not perfect. It's all about sequencing more than accurate flying. We can see that right now my buddy's just about to reach the IP inbound point. Sorry, he's past the IP inbound point. He's just about to reach the roll-in point, and I'm more or less a beam, so I'm able to call out any shots for him if he gets shot at. And he rolls in. He dispenses chaff and flare, just flare on the way in. Selects his target. Releases his munition. The whole time I'm watching him. And then as he comes off target, he breaks right and left. And then as I turn IP inbound, he starts to turn out so that he's in a good position to cover me. And that's really all there is to the angle rake range pattern during the daytime. One person's on the downwind, the other person's attacking. The person who's on the downwind is cover. He watches, makes sure that the person who's attacking is not being shot at. The person who's attacking obviously drops their ordnance, and then the person who is cover turns in as the other person turns out. So there should be a natural alignment of shooter has now reached the IP inbound point and cover has now started to turn out at the same time. So there's always a good sequence where you're roughly out of phase with each other. Okay, so as we can see here, this is the cockpit view from my aircraft during the daytime angled rake range pattern, as we just saw in TAC view. If we look over the hood, we can see that the aircraft's already set up. It's just good practice to get everything done as far ahead in advance as we can. So we've got the correct weapon selected, which in this case is the Mark 82, and you can see that that's boxed on the left corner of the MPCD there, although that may be a little bit small. You should memorise that that's the position in which the low drag Mark 80X series bombs show up. Over the hood, again, we can see that the aircraft's in CCIP mode with a reflected paper at the moment, but that's not really important. And the aircraft is about 2.5 miles slant range from the desired target point. Looking on the left MPCD, we can see that we did have the echo point selected with the BRC, the course selector knob used to select the final attack heading of 270 degrees, and the aircraft's roughly flying along it. Looking at the hood again, we can see there were a true airspeed of 340 knots, so 20 knots slower than the pattern airspeed, but within an acceptable margin of error, and we're at about 12,000 feet, plus or minus 100 or 200 feet, just again for an acceptable margin of error. Again, reiterating that it's more important to fly with good situational awareness and a good sequencing with the other aircraft in your flight than it is to fly absolutely precisely to the given altitudes and airspeeds and headings. On the right MPCD there, you can see that I've used the DMT to pick up a target even before I've actually entered the pattern. So that's quite useful, as it just reduces that stress, because I know that if I save that point, whether that be through a temporary target point using waypoint increment long, or if it's through just pressing the DMT, the TDC action button just to save that point, it just reduces the requirement for me to then fumble around trying to find a target after I've made the IP inbound turn.
1-1 split now.
Now we can see that I'm just about to start my turn from the effectively upwind portion of the pattern, so before we're actually in the pattern. And I'm going to descend from 12,000 feet, which is 1,000 feet above the desired pattern altitude, and I'm going to descend down to the pattern altitude of 11,000 feet. I'm going to aim to roll out from my turn at a delta distance of 3 nautical miles, plus or minus half a mile, for allowing a reasonable margin of error, so that I'm focusing more on looking outside the cockpit and having the correct sequencing, rather than looking inside the entire time.
1-1 abeam.
And here we can see I'm just having a quick look at the backup armament panel just to verify that it has definitely picked up that I'm in the CCIP mode. I've got the correct quantity, multiple and interval, and I've got the correct fusing set for the weapon. And then I'll have a look at my master arm, make sure that that is up and that the hood is in the edge ground mode, and have a look for the symbology over the hood.
1-1 IP inbound.
Now you can see that I'm just making a really swift and sharp turn without pulling the aircraft into a stall, and I'm adding almost full power so I can turn as tightly as possible, and that's just so I can get the DMT within its gimbal limits as quickly as possible. I've already stabilised my sensor point system designation to that area, and then I'm just going to fine tune my target point with the DMT. Now, just before I reach the rolling point, you can see on the EHSD I'm not perfectly aligned with the final attack heading. It doesn't make too much of a difference in this scenario. Again, in the real world, you actually get a plus or minus error of plus or minus 30 degrees, so that's 30 degrees either side of the final attack heading. Obviously, you want to be as close to it as you possibly can, but in this scenario, what's more important is just making sure that you've got the system designation accurately set via the DMT to the target that you specifically want to attack. At 2.5 miles, I'm going to roll in. I'm simply going to roll onto my back, and I'm going to pull the aircraft until the velocity vector is on the target, and hopefully, if I've picked the correct rolling distance, that will match up with a 45-degree nose down angle on the hood ladder. I'll then continue to roll in the direction of the initial roll. That's just to keep with the momentum going, so you're not rolling right, then stopping, then rolling left. And then I'll place the velocity vector on the target, stabilize it, and then I'll gently walk the pipper up to the target. The reason we do that is that applies a very slight positive G, so that you get a good separation of the weapon, and there's no risk of it coming back into the aircraft and either damaging or completely destroying the aircraft and killing you. Then I'll pause for a moment, I'll pickle, press the pickle button, I'll pause for a moment, and then I will pull away, adding full power, jinking left and right. And it's important to note that you need to make sure that your ECM program is set correctly before you even depart whatever airfield you're leaving from. And you need to make sure that you dispense flares as you roll in and as you come off the target, as those are your two most vulnerable times.
1-1 in from the east.
IPN bro.
1-1, 1 away. 1-1 splash, 1-1 out to the north. 1-1, 1 hit.
So it's worth noting a few different things here. So firstly, you can hear that my wingman's called IP inbound, so that means either he was a little faster or I was a little slow. Whatever the case is, it doesn't matter. What that means for me is I need to turn out and back into the pattern as soon as possible so that I can get visibility over the target area as he rolls in, so that I can call out any shots that may be made on him. Also, you can hear me make a few calls there. So firstly, away is a standard brevity term for dropping a bomb. So you just say the number of bombs and then you say away. So for example, 2 away. Splash is a standard brevity term for the impact of a munition, either in an air-to-air or an air-to-ground context. So in an air-to-ground context, when you see the bomb land or the rocket or whatever the case is, you say splash. A lot of people use the term shack. Shack is an informally used terminology for using training munitions such as smoke bombs. And finally, the term hit is used to describe a impact of a surface, an air-to-surface munition within a critical lethality range to a given target. In plain English, that means if the bomb or rocket, whatever the case is, has landed close enough or directly on the target to instigate a mission kill, we would say hit. If it's multiple hits, we would say 2 hits, 3 hits, whatever the case may be.
Ninja 1-2 in from the east.
Okay, I'm now back in the pattern, and we can hear that my buddy's just said that he's in from the east, so I'm going to be looking out for him, and I'm going to call visual as quickly as possible, and I'm just going to be overwatching him to make sure that no harm comes to him.
1-1, visual. 1-1 IP inbound.
On the right. Ninja 1-2. Splash. 1 hit. Off to the north.
1-1 in from the east. One away. 1-1, 1 hit.
Okay, so before we move on to the night ARRP, or the guided ARRP, I'm going to quickly show you some of the don'ts of performing the ARRP. So this is a snippet from the night pattern, but it applies to both the day and the night, both the guided and the unguided patterns. You can see that I've dropped a munition and I've come off target and I'm dispensing flares as I should do. I don't immediately perform the jinking maneuver, which obviously could give you the possibility of being shot down in the climb, but of course the flares should offer a level of protection. And now this pattern should be flown at 13,500 feet, so 13500 feet. And that's because the manpad has a reach of about 11,000 feet, and the target elevation is 1,500 feet. Now you can see here I'm only at 1,200 feet, so 12,200, and I'm quite slow, and the missile just comes up and hits me, and there's nothing I can do about it. Now at this point in the cockpit, I was actually looking down at my engine warning lights thinking, have I overstressed the engine? And I wasn't looking at the primary factor of I'm too low, which puts me inside the kill range of the SAM. The manpad. So really important to only ever descend when you are attacking, to make sure that you dispense chaff and flares, and then to ascend again with the off-target maneuver, the jink, dispense flares, and get straight back up to the safety altitude. And this is exactly why the ARRP can't be performed in an environment where you have contested air between friendly and enemy fighters, because you need to be able to stay above manpads. So quickly going through the night or the guided ARRP. The guided ARRP just refers to whenever you're using guided munitions. The night ARRP is obviously performed at night. You can do unguided ARRP at night. It is significantly harder. You can do the guided ARRP during the day. It is significantly easier. You can do the night the guided ARRP at night, which is significantly harder also simply because doing things at night just makes things harder. So you can see in this example, my wingman over there is lasing for me, and the first thing you'll notice about the guided ARRP is actually the other player, the cover, as he is called, wants to try and be behind the beam point as the shooter is IP inbound. That way he gets a longer period of time to pin the target with his laser and a longer period of time with which to actually stay within the gimbal limits of the T-pod. The second thing you will notice is that the cover flies significantly slower in order to maintain the gimbal limits of the T-pod for as long as possible, and once the shooter has picked up his target, he speeds up as much as possible to shoot and then get off target, extend upwind, and then turn onto the downwind with plenty of room to allow him to have that good line of sight with the T-pod for as long as possible. Now in this example, I am actually a little bit high. I should be at 13,500 feet. In an example like this, it's not too much of a problem. However, if you had an example where you had 3 people in the ARRP and 1 person overhead just lasing, that would be a problem because you could potentially collide with them. And again, my wingman here is slightly low. He's 1,500 feet below the pattern altitude, so that puts him within potentially lethal range of man pads. So as we can see here, buddy's lasing, I fire my weapon, and I come off the target. It's really that simple for the night ARRP, or the guided ARRP. Where it gets considerably more complex is when you start considering the fact that you're switching between different sensor types. There's all the different switchology and screenology going on, and then you're coordinating with different radio comms to make sure that you're ready for the next step. And it does happen in very quick succession. You're trying to balance multiple things. You're trying to look out the cockpit, look in the cockpit, look at your sensors, make sure everything's set up, make sure your laser hasn't overheated, crack code, all those sorts of things. At the same time, you're trying to fly 2 parameters so that you don't get to a ridiculously high altitude like I am just here, and that you don't fly into someone else. And if we just fast forward here again, you can see my buddy's a little bit low and I turned a little bit early, but again, in a good position to paint with the T-pod. And at this point, I'm actually, as you can see by the difference between the dash line, which represents where the nose is pointed, the attitude indicator, and the velocity vector, represented by this solid line here, you can see I'm actually applying a lot of right rudder to keep the wings level and try and turn the aircraft to keep the T-pod within gimbal limits so that I can keep that target painted for my buddy. Unfortunately, this was a training sortie, didn't quite manage to pick up the target, and the missile, the guided rocket went off. Here we go, I'm considerably high. I drop my nose to pick up the target, managed to get it, and in a 1, I shoot it off as my buddy's lasing it, so it's a little bit different than the bombs, which I'll talk about in just a moment. So in this particular scenario, you can see that I've taken off here that snippet that I showed you earlier where I got shot by a man pad. Luckily enough, on the training server, there is actually a runway just nearby. I managed to recover to that and repair so I could continue the training sortie with the student. Straight away, I'm going to use a GBU-12, so I'm at the IP inbound position here immediately after departing, and I do that really hard hook turn, the same as during the day, and straight away I've got my DMT in the LST laser search track mode. You might find that because you have the waypoint designated on the EHSD so that you get the course line, you might find that because that is the case, the LST doesn't come up because it tries to slave to the INS designation with the DMT. So in that case, you need to press the NWS button, which is also the scene reject button for the air to ground mode, and that allow you to go back into the LST laser search track mode. So I make the hard turn. I ask my cover there to turn on his laser. As I come out of the turn, I pick up his laser in my DMT. Obviously I can't see anything because it's at night. I then depress the TDC action button to change that from an off-board target point to an onboard target point. So you'll see on the DMT screen, even though you can't actually see any image, you can see the writing. You'll see that it changes from it changes from LST to TV. And at that point, you know that when he turns his laser off, you're not going to lose that position. The reason that's relevant is because for the guided bombs, you just need a INS sensor designation to drop the bombs from, and that gives you the symbology that you need. And then the laser terminally guides the weapon from there. And you only want to turn the laser on after you've dropped the bomb to maximize the amount of time that the laser can be used prior to the impact point. If we left the laser on from this point here, right the way around to the bomb impacting the target, the laser would have overheated by the time that the bomb impacted the target. So just fast forward a little bit here, you can see I've done that really tight hook turn. I'll drop my nose slightly, pick up the target, and then I'll level the aircraft back out. I'm a little bit low, but obviously there's a lot of things to manage here. And now I'm just flying to the symbology. We can see that my buddy's directly abeam from me. So he's still lasing, he's still within gimbal limits, he's still able to laser that target. I get the weapon off, and I ask him to put the laser on again. Again, we'll show you the brevity shortly after this. And I'm climbing away, and I'm a little bit high, which isn't ideal, but it's better than being too low. And you can see straight away that bomb's picked up the laser, and it's tracking toward the desired target, as lased by my wingman over there. So as soon as I've released that bomb, I'm no longer interested in my own sensor point designation. So as soon as I release that bomb, I'm actually switching back into the T-pod and using the INS designation as a sort of a bookmark, as it were, to then be able to look around and find another target immediately in that area, so that during this first portion of this turn here, sort of from passing overhead the target through to the 90-degree here, my T-pod actually goes blind because of the gimbal limits. But when I get to about here and I start to roll through a bit more, the T-pod picks up the targets again, and I'm able to immediately from here provide laser assistance as soon as my wingman requests it. So you can see here he is a little bit low. You should ask me for a laser designation any second now. He turns in a little bit off to the side, which isn't ideal, and ideally in a scenario like that you'd probably want to go off dry, but he does get the laser and he does hit the target. So to recap, he comes around the corner there, asks me to turn my laser on, I turn it on, he picks up the laser, flies to the symbology, I turn my laser off, and then he releases and asks me to turn my laser on again. So there's two reasons we use the laser: to update the INS designation in the aircraft, and then to actually put the bomb on the target. Okay, so in this next snippet, we're going to see the entirety of a GBU-12 engagement from the IP inbound right the way through to the off target, and then demonstrating how I transition from dropping the weapon to then using the T-pod immediately afterward. So the key things to note are, I'll roll IP inbound and I'll ask for the laser to come on. I'll then use the DMT and the laser search track mode to pick up the sensor designation, so I need to drop the nose slightly to do that, and then I'll depress the TDC action button to update that from a laser spot to a INS system designation. So the correct brevity for picking up the laser would be spot, and then the correct brevity for picking up something with your own sensors or visually is contact. So once I say contact, that's the indication for the other person to turn their laser off, so that when we really need it during the attack phase, the bomb falling through the air, the laser's less likely to overheat. After that, I then fly to the symbology, I release the weapon. As the weapon comes away, I call sign 1 away, and then I ask for the laser to come back on. The only other thing to note is that it is preferable, very preferable, that when you see the countdown for the auto bombing and it says 10 seconds, you just say call sign 10 seconds. That gives your cover a heads up as to the fact that you're about to need the laser to be turned on.
IP inbound.
I've got a laser target for you if you want it.
Yeah, roger. Request laser.
Lasers on.
Spot and contact. Ten seconds. One away. Request laser.
Lasers on, code 1688.
Okay, and you may need to turn to keep the laser on all the way through. If you do, you just turn at the IP inbound point and kick in bootloads of rudder to bring the nose round. One's out to the north.
Okay, so we can see that in this example, I'm a little bit late to switch to the T-pod. I actually wait until I'm out. Now, if you are on top of your switchology and so on, after you release the bomb, you can just straight away do sensor select depress twice to switch straight into the T-pod. Your sensor designation will be the target that you've just hit, and then you can immediately just start looking for a target for your buddy just to save that time. I didn't do that in this case, and you can see the problem is now I'm trying to fly to the pattern. I'm climbing, so I'm high, and I'm also struggling to keep the T-pod within gimbal limits. I do, however, find a target, and when he requests the laser on, I turn the laser on. You can then see that when he says contact, I turn the laser back off. And then when he says 10 seconds, I try and hold the aircraft within gimbal limits, and I slow myself down so that I can maintain those gimbal limits for as long as possible, so that when he says one away, laser on, I'm then able to provide him with a good laser designation, again, to support that weapon all the way to its desired impact point.
One, you got a good hit.
Perfect, thanks.
And two is IP inbound. Two request laser.
Roger, laser on, code 1688.
Contact or spot. And contact.
Lasers off.
Seconds. Two, one away. Request laser.
1-1, laser on, code 1688. One T, 1-1 splash. Stand by. 1211, hit, good job. 11 is IP inbound.
Okay, now so this next one is going to be myself firing an APKWS at a target. So again, we're using buddy lasing. So you'll hear that I call IP inbound, and then as I get close to the end of the IP inbound turn, and my nose is pretty much on the target, I will then ask my cover to turn on the laser. The difference here is that I don't then say contact, correction spot, then contact, then he turns his laser off, and then I fly to the symbology, etc. In this case, I simply say spot, then I say rifle. He keeps his laser on throughout that entire time until he sees a splash in his T-pod. And again, the benefit of doing this is you can release the weapon much sooner than with the GBU-12 or the GBU-16 or any of the laser-guided bombs. And you can immediately switch yourself over to a T-pod and start looking for another target for your wingman. So then immediately you transition to the cover role, and they immediately transition to the shooter role. And all that does is it just means that you can get targets, you can get weapons on targets much, much faster.
11, request laser.
Laser on, code 1688.
11 in from the east. 11 spot and rifle.
There we go. That's a shack right there.
So now that we've covered all the elements of the ARRP and all of the possible variations, including day and night, and guided and unguided versions of the ARRP, now you just need to know how to exit the ARRP, which is really simple. You continue flying the pattern shape, and you just climb back up to 1,000 feet above the pattern altitude, or in this case, because I wasn't flying it properly, I've descended to 1,000 feet above the pattern altitude. You then just look out into the turn, because everyone's turning right, everyone needs to look the same direction. That simplifies things. And then all the wingmen have to do, if there's more than one, is just cut inside the pattern as soon as they've got visual on the lead and fly up to rejoin with them. And it's as simple as that. And once they're happy for you to turn, if fuel is a concern, you can obviously start your turn and leave the pattern. And as long as they have visual on you and or have a TACAN beacon in air-to-air mode to get some distance information from you, they can just follow you out and rejoin on you as you go. But it's as simple as that. Fly the pattern 1,000 feet above, continue the shape, make sure that you see each other, and just communicate in plain English and rejoin and head home. Appreciate that this has been a long video. I hope that you found it useful, and if you have any questions or suggestions, please get in touch with me. Thank you very much for watching.